morning, everybody. You all are welcome to the both physical and the online participants. Welcome to the Wednesday KSM lecture series, CME lecture series. And today we have a special lecture regarding neonatal. So, common neonatal conditions, is it consoling or concerning? Let me introduce today's speaker. Is Priyanka Dematava, and he got his MBBS Peradeniya 2005 and MD Colombo in 2014, and she obtained her overseas training in Imperial College London. And uh, important thing, she is the first consultant in perinatal and neonatal medicine in Sri Lanka in 2019. And currently, she's attached to the teaching hospital Peradeniya as a neonatal consultant neonatologist, and she's the lecturer in Faculty of Medicine, University of Peradeniya. Over to you, Priyanka, to elaborate on us on common neonatal conditions. Thank you.
Good morning. First, I would like to thank the President and the Council of the KSM for giving me this opportunity. So I'm going to discuss some common neonatal conditions within this lecture. And yes, during next 40-45 minutes, I will introduce why I selected this topic. It's mainly targeting the primary care physicians and few common neonatal conditions we encounter in day-to-day practice. So, newborn babies are really unique, and their physical and mental well-being depend on the correct management in the neonatal period. So they manifest various conditions after birth. Most of the time, they are benign, but sometimes they are sinister. We need real support to prevent morbidity and mortality. If you take the global situation, this is a study done in 2005 to 2014 in England. They have showed that after discharge from the initial period, there were significant number of readmissions, and out of those, 85% preventable readmissions. And most common cause, there are so many causes, but the commonest was feeding problems and jaundice. What about our situation? This is a study done in 2015 in Teaching Hospital Kandy, where they have found nearly half of the population, the cohort, they sought medical advice for their neonate following hospital discharge. And most interestingly, the majority of mothers, they sought medical advice from the general practitioner. Only 30% or around 30% consult specialist doctors. So most of the time, its primary care physician is the first contact doctor. And there's another study done in Teaching Hospital Ragama. There also they found common causes for admissions are neonatal jaundice and some feeding issues. And this is a study done in 2019 in Peradeniya Hospital just to see the awareness of the mothers who care the baby. So the mother's awareness to see how knowledgeable they are to care their newborn. It's sad to see, if you see, we have given the knowledge score for the given conditions and found out only 36% of that cohort had an average knowledge to care their baby. So the problem is, though we can't see it, there's a problem about the knowledge and the care that we can provide. So there's a high number of readmissions. That is the reason for me to select this topic. Actually, why we are worried? One thing is lack of knowledge. And most of the time, parents are anxious. Sometimes the baby's condition may be normal, but for their eye, they haven't experienced it before, especially when it comes to a first-time mother. So they are anxious. The parental anxiety plays a major role, and pressure from the family members. They haven't done studies to see how much pressurized the mothers are, but it's observation where all these family members really want to do things for the baby, the newcomer, where mother can't cope up with the stress and with the past experience. If a mother had a bad experience with the first or second child in the past, with that post-traumatic stress, there's experience, they are also worried. Then it's our duty as healthcare professionals to have the knowledge, skills, and attitudes for what? To differentiate the benign conditions from the dangerous conditions in the neonates. Now we'll take one by one. Just two scenarios. One mother comes and says, yes, my 2-week-old baby girl cries intermittently before urinating. Sometimes only for a few seconds. And she doesn't cry while she's sleeping. Nothing alarming like. And there's another scenario where the babies cry before urination for 3 to 4 minutes. Sometimes he cries while passing urine as well. Both have come to you. Now, what you are going to do? What are the common causes for crying while micturition? The commonest is elimination communication. What is this elimination communication? So, baby knows now the baby is going to pass urine, and as a signal, baby cries. So, crying is a one form of elimination communication. There are so many. They can just freeze and wait. They can have tonic episodes. If you go through, it's so interesting to see their communication cues. Sometimes it may be due to distended bladder, which causing the discomfort. But there's no research to support this hypothesis. Or it may be an inflammation in the perineal area, which cause some irritation with the contact of the urine. Or it may be significant thing like urinary tract infection. So what can you do? The timing of this crying episode is very important. You can clearly ask, okay, your baby, whether babies cry before passing, or is it during the passage or after passing? What is the importance of knowing it? This elimination communication and distended bladder, they cries before pass urine. And if it is an irritation, yes, most of the time, they might cry after the passage of urine. Even babies can cry just due to the discomfort. But if they pass during the passage of urine, so while they pass in, that is quite significant. It may be a sign of urinary tract infection. Then the intensity of cry. They can just cry for a while and stop it. But if there's a burning kind of sensation, there may be cry for few minutes. Then associated clinical features are very important. If it is just cry with discomfort or as a cue, the baby is otherwise fine. But if it's a significant problem like urinary tract infection, there may be some systemic features like poor feeding, poor activity, unexplained fever. Then if it's a low-grade kind of urinary tract infection, poor weight gain can be there. And there may be some urinary symptoms like smelly urine. And you can examine the baby and see whether perineal area is free of any rashes. Then, if baby cries while micturition, yes. If baby cries before passing urine and otherwise healthy, yes, you can console that mother. If it is associated with perineal inflammation, we have to support the baby just to cure the rash. What we can do, one is keep the area clean and dry, or if it is significant, we can apply some rashes to prevent the inflammation. Or if it is significant signs with UTI, you need, it's a concerning sign now, you have to do the further investigation and the treatment. Okay. The second topic is the jaundice. Yes, it's a quite common. One can come and say, yes, my baby looks yellow. What can I do? And most of the time, it's not the mothers that detect the jaundice. So it's the healthcare professional most of the time detect the jaundice in the baby. So I should be trained enough to detect it. What is jaundice? It's the yellowish discoloration of the skin, sclera, and the mucous membrane. So it's very important. With these home remedies like applying Venivalgat and things, baby can become yellow, yes, but the sclera is still white. So you can differentiate or you can inquire from the mother. And if you can see this picture, this is something has done in 1960s by the scientist called Kramer. The Kramer's index, still for the day we can use it, where normally the jaundice spread from the head to toe. It's cephalocaudal distribution. They start from head and come down to the toes. Depending on the level of involvement, the area number 1, 2, 3, 4 line, you can have a rough blood value of the bilirubin. So why it is important to see the jaundice? One type, what we call, it can cause long-term disability. If the jaundice level, the bilirubin level is high enough to cause acute bilirubin encephalopathy, they can end up with chronic bilirubin encephalopathy, what we call kernicterus. It's a form of cerebral palsy where you have chorioathetoid movement. So it's a simple intervention which can prevent a lifelong disability. When we categorize jaundice, we can categorize it depending on the time of presentation and the type of bilirubin. When we come to the time of presentation, yes, we have 3 categories. One is early jaundice, where the babies become jaundice within first 24 hours. Very unlikely to pick by the general practitioner. Why? During this period, most of the time babies are in the hospital. Then we have an entity called physiological jaundice, where they present somewhere around day 3 to after 24 hours, preferably within day 2 to 7 line. Or this physiological jaundice can be exaggerated with some associated findings. Then there's another entity called prolonged jaundice, where the baby either present initially after day 14, or the jaundice is persistent beyond day 14 for a term baby, or the day it is the same for 21 days, that is appear or persistent beyond 21 days for a preterm baby. Then you have to look for the type of bilirubin. If you do the blood levels, we ask for 3 things, that is our total bilirubin, direct and indirect. Now, direct hyperbilirubinemia, yes, if your fraction is more than 20% of the total, it is abnormal. Even the value is low, but the direct value is more than 20%, it's significant. So all these jaundice, especially the early jaundice, exaggerated physiological where the levels are high enough for the treatment, and prolonged jaundice, and the direct hyperbilirubinemia. Those entities are always abnormal and warrant further evaluation and treatment. Now, few words about physiological jaundice, because that is the most common type that we encounter. As I said, it's commonly present after about 24 hours and within first week. That's mainly because of the increased turnover of the red cell in the newborn. It's quite common. Now, if we go back to the Kramer's index, it's difficult to go back. But if you find a baby, a term baby coming to you somewhere on day 4, 5, only face is involved, is it significant? No. But that the same baby comes with involving the palms and soles, yes. So if it's a mild jaundice, you can just console them, and if baby is clinically well. If not, all these significant jaundice where I have marked red, they need further evaluation. And if your physiological jaundice associated with any of these conditions like prematurity, significant dehydration due to delayed establishment of feeding, some extravasated blood like cephalhematomas, and suspected polycythemia. If mother is a one with gestational diabetes or pregnancy-induced hypertension, there's a high chance. So they can have exaggerated physiological jaundice where you need to do the levels and see whether they need treatment. The primary treatment is the phototherapy. So if it's physiological jaundice, the value less than phototherapy, yes, we can console them. But your prolonged jaundice and direct hyperbilirubinemia and level more than phototherapy, yes, you need action. Then another common condition probably you might encounter is umbilical discharge. It's quite common. What are the possible causes? It may be just the normal umbilicus, but not clean enough. Or it may be bleeding with hemorrhagic disease of newborn. What is hemorrhagic disease of newborn? It's a condition that can cause due to lack of vitamin K. Due to lack of vitamin K, they have the problem with vitamin K dependent clotting factors. With that, they can have bleeding. That's why we give vitamin K at the time of birth to prevent this. And unfortunately, breast milk also a poor source of vitamin K. Breast milk is really rich in everything, but it's poor with vitamin K. So it also contributing. And gut flora is not enough to produce enough vitamin K. Now, if they can present with bleeding, especially from the umbilical stump, what we call classic hemorrhagic disease of newborn. Or this may just be due to umbilical sepsis. And there's another entity called umbilical granuloma, where the epithelialization of the umbilicus is not complete and the epithelial cells grow, excessive growth of the cells. And it may be due to a significant finding like persistent vitalointestinal duct or urachus, where the embryological structures which still persisting. Now, we have to check the associated features with this umbilical discharge. Now, when you get the baby, it's very important to expose the baby adequately and look very carefully. Gently clean the umbilical area and recheck. Most of the time, it may be just debris collecting with the water and giving some stain in the nappy. So once you clean, if umbilicus is healthy, no worries. Or it may be frank bleeding. If you get bleeding, you have to check two things. One thing is it's only from the umbilical stump, or are there any bleeding from other places as well, and whether baby is well or ill. Then it can be smelly umbilical discharge, the serosanguinous discharge, which is suggestive of umbilical sepsis, especially if associated with periumbilical erythema. Then I explained the umbilical granuloma, or it may be the continuous discharge from this persistent serosanguinous discharge from the persistent vitalointestinal duct, or it may be, if the sinus is with the urachus, you can get clear discharge with smell of urine. Now, this is an umbilical granuloma. Sometimes it's quite obvious, but sometimes you have to really clearly see. Sometimes it's buried within the umbilicus. So you have to look very carefully. And inflammation around the umbilicus, it's common because this is liquefying, and it's with that there's a tiny redness can be there. But if the discharge associated with significant red area involving the superficial tissues, it's quite alarming. This is a sign of umbilical sepsis, and this can spread in the soft tissues and the fascia as well. So they have done studies and found this persistent umbilical discharge is quite significant. Most of the time it's due to either first patent urachus or vitalointestinal duct. So none of these above conditions, but still mother complains of persistent discharge, better do a scan and get the surgical opinion as well. So if you encounter with a baby with umbilical discharge, yes, baby is clinically normal. You clean the umbilicus and you look into it, it's healthy, you can console that mother. Umbilical granuloma, yes, you recognize it, and treatment is easy. We are going to cauterize it either with liquid silver nitrate, which is not freely available for us, or with the copper sulfate. But if it is umbilical sepsis, which need antibiotic treatment, and if it is a persistent discharge, it's a very much concern where you need further evaluation and treatment. Now, regarding the treatment of umbilical sepsis, most of the time we try to apply superficial antibiotics. If it's a mild one, sir, you can do it. But if it's significant one involving the soft tissue, just applying the local antibiotics might not helpful. You have to go for systemic antibiotics. The next baby, yes, this baby is having excessive tearing from one eye. What you can do? Eye discharge from neonates, quite common. It may be just due to congenital lacrimal duct obstruction. It's quite common, and they present with persistent tearing or mucoid discharge. Whereas if it's neonatal conjunctivitis, either especially due to bacteria, they present with significant inflammation of the eye with surrounding soft tissue inflammation as well. If you encounter baby with eye discharge, better check the nature of the discharge, whether this is purulent, which is more suggestive of bacteria, or whether it's mucoid, maybe viral, yes, or mucopurulent with excessive tearing, which is a feature of nasolacrimal duct obstruction and associated redness and swelling. If you take these two eyes, this eye looks normal, though there's a bit of purulent-like discharge, otherwise eye looks normal, conjunctiva is also not red, and soft tissue seems to be fine. Baby's otherwise fine. So most likely to be due to nasolacrimal duct obstruction. We can reassure just explaining the simple massaging for the mother. But if this is persist beyond 6 months, you need intervention. But early phase, you can just console them. Whereas if it is with redness, thick purulent discharge with soft tissue edema, more suggestive of conjunctivitis, mostly the bacterial, you need treatment. So when it comes to eye discharge, it can be just mucoid or clear eye discharge of nasolacrimal duct obstruction, where the initial phase you can console them and just advise with the simple massaging. Especially the neonatal conjunctivitis and associated with cellular periorbital cellulitis is an alarming which need treatment. And vomiting. Vomiting is quite common. They just sometimes have a forceful vomiting, like the second scenario where the 3-week-old baby who was apparently well now coming with 2 weeks. For the first 2 weeks, Baba has been fine, coming with forceful vomit after each feed. Or it can be another baby, like in the first scenario where he gets frequent episodes of vomitus with hiccups. What can you do? Causes of vomiting in neonates, yes, it may be just overfeeding by the mother. So they just fill the bottle and Baba throws up the excess. It's a non-forceful, they just throws up. Those babies, they really grow well. Or it may be a significant sign of significant systemic illness, especially an infection like meningitis, septicemia, or urinary tract infection. They can present just with vomiting. Or it may be due to the conditions associated with the gastrointestinal tract. Just gastroesophageal reflux. The newborn lower esophageal sphincter, the tone is comparatively less. So they have a tendency to get gastroesophageal reflux. Those babies are the one who throws up non-forcefully and quite common to present with hiccup. Or it may be significant enough to cause gastroesophageal reflux disease with associated respiratory findings and poor growth. Or this may vomiting be due to small bowel obstruction, especially if baby comes with episodes of vomiting where in between baby seems to be fine and the vomiters is greenish in color. You have to suspect whether this is a malrotation where becoming a volvulus and twisting and untwisting. Or it can be a non-bilious vomiting due to pyloric stenosis, which is quite common in 3rd and 4th week, and they present with non-bilious vomiting and it's very projectile vomiting. But initial phase, you might not be able to differentiate unless you look very carefully. If the baby comes with vomiting, again, you have to clinically assess timing, whether this is immediately post-feed, forceful, and baby demands feeds again, suck vigorously, again vomit without proper weight gain. So associated one is the timing, which is suggestive of your pyloric stenosis. Overfed babies, they do throws up quickly, but their growth is fine. You can see they are very distressed with the distended stomach with overfeeding. Compared to them, the babies with pyloric stenosis, they don't gain weight properly. Then the intensity of vomiting, it is just non-forceful vomiting like your gastroesophageal reflux or projectile vomiting, which is more suggestive of your pyloric stenosis. And the color. If you have greenish yellow or green color, this is unless proven otherwise some surgical pathology with a small bowel involvement. Then associated clinical features, as I already mentioned, the weight gain, whether it's normal or abnormal. And a babies with pyloric stenosis, latter part of their disease, they present with significant dehydration. Now, we talk about that pyloric stenosis present in the 3rd and 4th week life, but they can come in early first 2 weeks as well. Not only early, the preterm babies also might get this pyloric stenosis. There are case reports that diagnose pyloric stenosis even in preterm babies as well, though this is a disease of term babies and after the first 2 weeks. And gastroesophageal reflux is a common presentation. What we can do for them? If it is just reflux without the features of disease, you can reassure the mother, just advise on positioning. But if there are features of reflux disease where there are some respiratory symptoms and growth failure, they need treatment. If you encounter a baby with vomiting, yes, otherwise fine, just the history of suggestive of overfeeding, well-grown baby, reassure them, but advise on proper feeding plan. Because sometimes mothers tend to feed quite frequently. And initial phase, we advise them to feed 2 hourly, 20 minutes. That's the normal advice they given. But we haven't told them when to change that schedule. So some mothers, they do wake up their babies 2 hourly and try to feed 20 minutes. But with time, what happens? Mother produce enough and baby strong enough to suck. So they suck quite well and they can have a quite longer fasting periods like 3 hours, 3 to 4 hours sometimes. Then that feeding advice should be given for the mother. Yes, if it is gastroesophageal reflux, yes, we can look for it, especially if it is causing some symptoms, we have to start medication. But if this baby is having at least a single episode of greenish vomiting or a projectile vomiting suggestive of pyloric stenosis, especially associated with abdominal mass of this the pylorus, it's an alarming sign which need further management. Noisy breathing. The parents bring the baby and say, my baby is having some noisy breathing. What you can do? They all the time worried about the lungs. That's what they ask. Can you please check the lungs because this baby is having a noisy breathing. What are the causes for noisy breathing in a neonate? It can be just normal. Why? Their nasal passage is quite narrow. So as if you pass an air column through a narrow tube, it can have some whistling sound, quite musical kind of sound. And their worrying is this sound is really high intensity in the morning. Why? In the morning, the environment is quiet. So this sound is more marked in the morning. But these babies are otherwise really well. You don't have to worry. You can console that mother after excluding the others. Or this noisy breathing, like a gurgling sound, just may be due to excessive oral secretions with your gastroesophageal reflux. And one important noisy breathing type that we have to recognize is the stridor. The commonest cause of the stridor is congenital laryngomalacia. But with the growth of the baby comes out from it most of the time. And normally the stridor of this congenital laryngomalacia appear after first week or two. That is mainly because of the wind, the volume of passage of the air is increasing with time, which causes this stridor. They have the problem from the beginning, but that defect is, or this collapse, the air passage is not strong enough to give that sound. Or it may be due to early onset stridor with significant anatomical problems in the laryngeal area. Now, when it comes to the stridor, you really want to check with the mother in which phase of the respiration they get it. Whether this is inspiratory, which is more suggestive of supraglottic, or it is biphasic, both in inspiration and expiration, more suggestive of infraglottic. Then onset. Is it from the early life or bit later? Then associated clinical features. Yes, children with congenital laryngomalacia, they can have stridor, but their respiratory distress is not that marked. And their growth is most of the time appropriate. Whereas, if it is significant pathology, they can have marked respiratory distress, sometimes warrants even to the intubation at the time of delivery. So you might not see them in the normal practice. And if it's a significant finding, sometimes it's associated with poor weight gain. Now, if your weight gain is fine, this is stridor, the late onset, baby is otherwise clinically fine, you can think, yes, probably this is congenital laryngomalacia, and you can console the mother, but anything significant, you have to do the ENT referral for the direct observation and to see the possible pathologies. Now, this is again a case report that they have found a stridor in a baby with a growth. And same, this is a baby present to our hospital with the stridor from the early phase found to have retropharyngeal abscess. And there are another two babies at the moment. One is with the cyst on the vocal cord. The other one is having a significant stenosis in the cricoid area. So these babies are common, but they have significant respiratory distress. The one we are not worried is this baby with congenital laryngomalacia or just giving the noisy breathing with gastroesophageal reflux. But symptomatic stridor all the time need further evaluation and management. Then, blood stain nappy. So this mother has brought this baby with red color nappy. Again, it's a common finding. What are the causes for this blood stain nappy? Though mother attribute to it blood, it may be just pinkish nappy with crystals due to urate. Or if it is especially if it's a girl, they can come with some spotting or the bleeding due to withdrawal bleeding from the maternal hormones. They also tend to have a vaginal bleeding. Or it may be just due to hematuria or coagulopathy, which causes bleeding in this baby. Now, when you assess the clinical features, it's very important to inspect the nappy to see actually whether this is blood or not. This is a nappy brought by the mother saying that baby is having red color urine to see it's not quite red for us to see as like blood. And it's not obvious here. They have some pinkish color particles. This is the nappy with a urate crystals. Then the clinical examination, whether this baby is well or ill. Yes, babies with passage of urate crystals or babies just with withdrawal bleeding, they are clinically well. And if not, if they come with some form of coagulopathy, there can be bleeding manifestations from the other sides as well. And if it is due to a UTI or urinary tract infection, they can have other symptoms of sepsis. Sex of the baby, yes, important to look for the possible withdrawal bleeding. Now, if you get a baby with blood-stained nappy, if it's pink crystals or withdrawal bleeding, you can consult that mother. But if it is a feature of infection or coagulopathy, yes, there's a concern. You need further evaluation and management accordingly. Yes, my last condition is the skin rashes in neonates. It's quite common. They can have various types of skin rashes. To differentiate whether they are benign or pathological. Especially, there are benign skin conditions like milia, erythema toxicum. It's quite alarming for the parent, but it's not cause any harm for the baby. Or it may be pathological like pustular rash or eczema. Now, I wonder whether it's clear enough, but this is a baby with erythema toxicum. If you can see, it's like an inflammation. It has a nice red base and a tiny white papule in the middle. And this spreads is a generalized rash, waxing and waning. So mothers are quite worried, and we too tend to apply antibiotics thinking that this is an infection. No. If you look very carefully, yes, there are white papules in the red base and babies otherwise clinically well. So you can reassure that mother. And this is a baby, yes, whitish papules. They are very tiny and coming with crops and confined most of the time to the facial area, which is milia. Whereas this is a single pustule I have seen. Probably we are quite familiar with pustules. If not, we have to carefully look, especially the neck area, the armpits, and the inguinal area, and see there are some rashes, okay, but looks like a pustule. Then you should be able to recognize this as a pustule. When you see pustules, it's not only the pustule itself, number matters. Because this is an isolated skin infection, so number-wise, if it's few, you can do the local treatment. But if it's an extensive one or very large pus collection, they need sometimes draining and intravenous antibiotics. And eczema also, it's quite distressing to the baby where they need treatment. They get the itchy rash over the skin flexures and they are quite irritable babies. Now, if the skin rash is something like erythema toxicum or milia, you can reassure that mother. Eczema, they need supportive care to avoid irritants and to soothe the skin. Skin sepsis, it's alarming, but depending on the gravity, you can decide how you are going to treat. Now, we know these children are our future and they are our precious resource. And their well-being is vital. The proper parental education on discharge and awareness of the healthcare professionals will help to reassure the parents and identify the red flag signs early. That will help in preventing unnecessary admissions and delay in seeking medical advice in alarming situations. Thank you. Okay. If you have any questions, you can ask.
Thank you, Priyanka. As usually, no questions. So the take-home message. So we have to, as doctors, is a very good lecture for the primary care physician. Not only for the primary care physician, as a day-to-day practice, you are helping health professional. Somebody might can come and bring the baby to you and ask whether this is something to be sinister, something to be alarmed. So we should know about that. And the other thing, yes, we have to concern the mother's complaint and then consult the mother. Thank you very much, Priyanka, for that wonderful lecture. As a token of appreciation, I will cordially invite Dr. Kanchana Singh, President-elect and Consultant Chief Surgeon, to hand over the certificate to Priyanka. Thank you, Priyanka. Thank you, everybody who participate physically as well as online. And your refreshment will be provided the other side of the room. Thank you very much.
Yeah.